he said, and called healthcare CEOs parasites. We will hear more about this in the coming hours and days. That does it for us. I'm Elizabeth Vargas. We'll see you right back here tomorrow night.
Law enforcement set to share this hour if they believe they tracked down a CEO killer. We are live in Pennsylvania tonight, plus acquitted in New York. The Daniel Penny decision turns political. And is there new hope for American hostages believed to be alive in the Middle East? That's Topping the Hill on NewsNation tonight.
It was crucial that we were able to remove him off the streets of America, and we were going to seek him out no matter where he was at the time.
Earlier this morning in Altoona, Pennsylvania, members of the Altoona Police Department arrested Luigi Mangione, a 26-year-old male on firearms charges. At this time, he is believed to be our person of interest in the brazen targeted murder of Brian Thompson, CEO of United Healthcare, last Wednesday in Midtown Manhattan.
So did the manhunt end with an Ivy League graduate and an astute employee at McDonald's. Tonight, New York police believe they have a quote-unquote strong person of interest in the shooting death of Brian Thompson, the former CEO of United Healthcare. Hello, good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Blake Berman. This is The Hill on NewsNation. A live look right now in Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania. That's about 100 miles to the east of Pittsburgh, as later this hour, law enforcement officials expect to give the very latest on the 5-day manhunt that started on the streets of New York City and led them to one of America's most famous restaurants about 300 miles away. It also comes as a jury rendered a high-profile decision in a different New York case. Daniel Penny acquitted today by a Manhattan jury. And tonight, one New York lawmaker is calling for the high-profile District Attorney Alvin Bragg to step aside. Joining me tonight as we await the news out of PA and the Big Apple, Chris Swecker, former Assistant Director of the FBI, Jennifer Coffindaffer, and Jesse Weber are both NewsNation contributors. But we begin tonight with what led to law enforcement to this moment. And our Caitlin Becker once again on the streets of New York. Caitlin?
Well, Blake, it really comes down to all of these surveillance cameras around New York City. They were really crucial in this case. Now, for days, we have been seeing that one image of the suspect with his mask pulled down. It was taken at a hostel where he was staying here on the Upper West Side. That's where I'm at right now. And it was that image that tipped off someone at McDonald's, a McDonald's employee, to look at someone who was eating breakfast and then turn around and call cops saying to them, I think this might be your guy. And this is something that NYPD credited to have a huge impact, Blake, on the turning point of this case. It was really a question of if you see something, say something. So the fact that the media got this picture out countless times in the past couple of days, and the fact that the NYPD used all of these surveillance cameras to track him down led to this moment. Had they not done that, I don't know how long this person would have allegedly been in the wind. We went this morning from scuba divers searching behind me here in Central Park for the alleged murder weapon, to authorities believing that they have it. They believe that the weapon the suspect was arrested with today may have been the weapon used to gun down Brian Thompson last week. It is being described as a ghost gun, Blake, which they think might have been 3D printed, so it doesn't have serial numbers on it. That is the gun that he was allegedly found with today. Those are the weapons charges that he will be arraigned on in Pennsylvania shortly. He will then be extradited from Pennsylvania back to New York to likely face charges for Thompson's murder. But there are a couple other really crucial pieces of evidence that he was allegedly found with as well today. A 3-page manifesto pointing to a potential motive, as well as a mask that looked very similar to the mask the killer was wearing at the time of the murder that we've seen from those surveillance photos, and an ID, a fake New Jersey ID, the same one police say the alleged killer used to check into that hostel here on the Upper West Side. Blake.
this evening. Caitlin, thank you. Joining me now, as I mentioned, Jennifer Coffindaffer, NewsNation Law and Justice contributor, retired FBI Special Agent Christopher Swecker, he's a former FBI Assistant Director, and our Jesse Weber, NewsNation legal contributor, with me as well. Hello to you all. Thanks for being here. Jennifer, it seems like they're trying to walk a fine line here, saying this is a person of interest, but not yet saying this is the guy. When do you think they get there?
Oh, I think they're there. I think they're just being politically correct, not saying they're there, calling him a person of interest.
Chris, what about, this obviously led across several states, New York into Pennsylvania, perhaps into Georgia at some point. We know that there was an investigation down there as well. The FBI's role in all of this, leading up to this and going forward, is what?
Yeah, there's an interstate nature to this. So now there's a federal nexus, and we have statutes that apply when someone travels interstate to commit a murder. They'll be involved in they could file charges in federal court, so that's hanging over it. There's also the distinct possibility that if this was ideologically driven, for example, as anarchist ideology or anti-capitalist, anti-corporate ideology, then they might fall into the rubric of domestic terrorism, which would even more invoke the federal jurisdiction.
Jennifer,
so
you're
going to be
there
interesting
as
to
well?
see how this plays out.
I'm sorry, Blake?
You're there as well. I saw you nodding along when Chris threw out the possibility of...
Absolutely. He states it perfectly. That's why the Bureau is involved in it. They're involved early on as a police cooperation matter because they don't have jurisdiction, meaning NYPD, the minute they learned that the bus left from Atlanta. So, of course, you're going to get the Bureau involved. Plus, they have so many resources concerning digital analysis and other laboratory and resources that they can lend to these types of cases.
Let me bring in Jesse Weber, NewsNation legal contributor. Jesse, there's going to be an arraignment here at the bottom of the hour. Obviously, right now, there's the gun charges and this ghost gun. What sort of walk me through what you expect to happen later this evening and in the upcoming days?
Okay, so the arraignment will just be his charges will be read to him. He'll understand what his rights are. These are placeholder charges. This is not really what we're concerned about. What we are concerned about is what the conversation with New York investigators are going to be having with him, because A, they want to understand if he really is the person, really is the suspect, and B, what evidence can they present to a grand jury in New York? That's key, because they need to bring him up on murder charges if, in fact, he is the suspect and the person who killed Brian Thompson. And then, of course, he'll be extradited back to New York to face those charges. I think right now these are charges that you put in place in Pennsylvania to hold him. Otherwise, if they arrested him and they didn't have anything to charge him with, he could technically be released. But the fact that he was in possession or allegedly in possession of this ghost gun with a silencer, that triggers a number of different statutes that he can be in violation of in Pennsylvania. But really, at the end of the day, it's New York where we need to focus.
Chris, if you got a phone call, Brian Thompson was the CEO of United Healthcare. It was, at the time, it's the 14th, 15th biggest company in the United States of America. This is a company with a market cap north of $500 billion. And I got to imagine, Chris, that there are some CEOs tonight of some high-profile companies over the last handful of days that start to wonder what if. And if you were picking up the phone and giving the advice of some concerned companies or individuals, what do you tell them?
Yeah, in fact, I have picked up the phone over the last couple of days. There is some angst out there. This is typical with security. They always have their hair on fire and they go looking for security when something bad happens. My advice is you have to do threat analysis and decide. Corporate executives don't like corporate security. They don't like executive protection. They like to be approachable. At the same token, they recognize the need for it, and sometimes the boards require it. So in this case, this was a well-published stockholders meeting, conference. This wasn't a big trade association meeting where it was random people attending. They knew the CEOs were going to be attending. The high-level officers were going to be attending in a time when there was pretty bad blood in the air, if you will. That happened back during the financial crisis, and we had a lot of incidents that were prevented that could have been one of these types of incidents because we did good threat analysis and we used pretty thorough executive protection techniques. This case, he needed executive protection, no doubt about it.
Jennifer, I'll leave the same question to you. If you're getting those calls, what are you telling these individuals and these companies?
Absolutely. I had reached out also and was reached out to because The bottom line is many of these CEOs, they have in-house protection details, but they don't like to use them. They like to go down the street without a detection or a protection detail around them. And they've just got to change that because there may be other Mangionis. So it's just ridiculous for them not to have the protection.
Jennifer Coffendeffer, Chris Swecker, I got to leave it there with you. Thank you both for your time. Appreciate you being with us here on the Hill tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You got it. All right. Meantime, elsewhere in New York this evening, Daniel Penny is walking as a free man tonight. A Manhattan jury unanimously finding Penny not guilty of criminally negligent homicide in the New York City chokehold subway death case. Now, the courtroom erupting into applause as the verdict was read aloud, a smile even visible on Penny's face. After leaving court, Penny seen celebrating and cracking a cold one with his legal team. The New York City Mayor Eric Adams commented on the verdict, saying he respects the process.
Jordan should not have had to die. And I strongly believe, as I've been stating, probably from day one, we have a mental health system that is broken. A jury of his peers heard the case, saw all the facts and all the evidence, and made a decision. And I joined DA Braggs in stating that I respect the process.
There's been some reaction pouring in from Capitol Hill as well. For example, the top Republican in Washington right now, the House Speaker Mike Johnson, calling Penny a hero, adding in part, quote, "Freedom for Daniel Penny. Great news for Daniel and America. He's a hero who saved lives. That trial should have never happened in the first place," says the Speaker of the House. Now, in 2023, Jordan Neely entered a New York City subway and began acting erratically, yelling about being hungry and thirsty and even saying he was ready to die. Penny, a passenger on the subway, grabbed Neely from behind in a chokehold, forcing him to the floor. After letting go, Neely was no longer responsive and later declared dead. The decision comes 3 days after the manslaughter charge in the second degree was dismissed on Friday after the jury was deadlocked. Jesse Weber, come on back in. Joining me as well, Scott Bolden, NewsNation contributor. Scott, you saw the reaction there from the Speaker of the House. There has been similar here in Washington on that side of the aisle as well. Your reaction today, Scott, to the decision from the jury?
Yeah, this was a weird case in the sense of how it was handled. You know, both the criminal negligence homicide as well as the second-degree manslaughter both had recklessness as a standard. And the first one that the government withdrew, that was a hung jury, if you will, and then the second one still had recklessness as an element, and then they found it not guilty, and that was a lesser included. Not clear why or what was on the mind of the jurors, because at least one person held out on the serious charge, and the less serious charge, they all agreed that a not guilty verdict. So very difficult. Remember, you still had somebody that died. You had alleged bad actor, if you will. That's nothing to celebrate if you're the Speaker of the House or even if you are the defendant in the case, because in my opinion, and it'd be interesting what Jesse says, when you have a dead person and you have an alleged bad actor and you have the video, regardless of what really caused the death, you got to do something about it as a state's attorney. I'm a former New York State prosecutor, and I got to tell you, this is a case that had to be brought. This was justice, and we have to respect the verdict of the people.
Jesse, you were sort of aghast on Friday at the way the judge acted then. The decision comes today, and your overall takeaway on this case is?
So first of all, Scott's right. Look, I mean, someone died. There were some really compelling facts for the prosecution. The fact that Jordan Neely was unarmed, he didn't touch anybody. But look, there's only one person to blame. There's only one set of people. It's the prosecutors. Why? If they really believed that he was guilty of manslaughter, then when the jury came back on Friday and say we're hung, that should have been a mistrial. They retry him. The fact that, by the way, this jury was told they can only consider the lesser charge if they are unanimous about manslaughter, and then all of a sudden the prosecutors come forward and say, you know what, let's throw that out. We're going to dismiss the charge after all this time, and now we want to essentially get Daniel Penny any which way can get him. You don't think that had an effect on this jury today? You don't think they were frustrated by that? You don't think they looked at that and said, does the prosecutors even have faith in their own case? They're telling us to abandon manslaughter after we just deliberated for over 20 hours trying to figure that out? I think that was the difference.
All right, got to leave it there. Yep. Scott Bolden, see you later in the show. Jesse Weber, thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
You got it.
All right, still to come here on the Hill. Morgan Ortagus joins us on the other side of the break. Some of Donald Trump's top national security picks up on Capitol Hill today. And this the backdrop in parts of the Middle East. Morgan on what she's hearing and what she believes comes next. Plus, the First Lady spotted sitting next to Donald Trump in France. Can you believe that the President of the United States didn't go and sent his wife in that position instead for that conversation there? Why is that? And Juan Soto just got the biggest contract in all of sports. We break down what that means in Washington terms. I'm Blake Berman. Welcome to Washington. This is The Hill on NewsNation, and this is the center of politics. We're back in 4. NewsNation, President-elect Donald Trump's national security nominees up on Capitol Hill today. Pete Hegseth, Kash Patel, Tulsi Gabbard, perhaps the next leaders of the Pentagon, FBI, and national intelligence, seen, as you can see there, coming and going into meetings with Republican senators throughout the day. Now, their visits also come amid huge developments in the Middle East. Over the weekend, Syrian rebels seized control of the capital Damascus, forcing the dictator there, Bashar al-Assad, to flee to Russia, where he was granted asylum. Joining me now, Morgan Ortagus, former State Department spokesperson in the Trump administration. Hello, Morgan. Thanks for being with us. Always great to see you. I guess the first question really is the obvious two-parter, which is, what do you think happens here in the next 42 days with President Biden as the commander-in-chief? And then what do you think happens after that with Donald Trump as the commander-in-chief?
Yeah, I mean, listen, the events of the last 2 weeks have just been mind-blowing. I've spent a lot of my career in the Middle East. Yeah. I was actually living in Saudi in 2010 and 11, tried to get to Syria when the Arab Spring first started, and was unable to get there. So this has been going, I've been following this for, almost well over a decade at this point, 12 or 13 years now. So what happened in the last 2 weeks seems surprising to a lot of people. I don't think it's so surprising if you've been following events on the ground in the past few months, because what we're seeing is that Iran's empire, their sphere of influence throughout the Middle East, is crumbling. And it's not crumbling, in my opinion, due to the Biden administration, as much as Biden tried to take a victory lap on that yesterday. It's instead crumbling because Israel has exposed Iran for the weak regime, I think, that they really are. They've been great at funding terror proxies. They've been great at trying to wreak havoc throughout the Middle East. But the core of their control in both Lebanon and Gaza, even in Yemen with the Houthis, and now we're seeing in Syria with the Assad regime, that core of their empire has fallen.
Do you think that's why there's some renewed hope today that maybe Hamas might release the American hostages?
Listen, I'm not saying this to be partisan. I think there's renewed hope on this because Donald Trump has threatened Hamas, not only recently with his statement last week, but also remember at the Republican convention, whenever President Biden was still the nominee at that point, at the Republican convention, in his speech that night, President Trump made it very clear that he wanted the hostages returned. Right. This is something that he placed an enormous amount of emphasis on in our first administration. At the time, he was able to get more American hostages back around the world than any president in modern history. It's really important to him that Americans come home, and he's issued this warning to Hamas. So yes, I think a weakened Iran helps us get to a deal. I also think President Trump's threats also help get us to a deal.
In Syria, Morgan, there is renewed hope possibly of the safe return of Austin Tice, 43 years old, from Texas, a journalist who was kidnapped 12 years ago. On August 13th, 2012. President Biden was asked about this yesterday. Here's what the president said. I want to get your reaction on the other side.
What does the U.S. know about where Austin Tice might be and if he's safe?
We believe he's alive. We think we can get him back, but we have no direct evidence to that yet.
We believe he is alive. We think we can get him back, but we have no direct evidence of that yet. Morgan, tapping into your knowledge of the region and your State Department experience, what do you hear there when you hear the commander-in-chief say that?
Well, I issued a lot of statements on Austin Tice. We were constantly speaking to his family. I was surprised a little that he said that he made the statement, not because I have inside knowledge about Austin Tice's whereabouts, but just because the families of these hostages hold on to all sense of hope, everything that they can get. And so, we're always, as government officials, careful about what we say because you don't want to overpromise and then, have the family be crushed.
Right.
But I hope President Biden is right, and I hope that we can do something about it. I think you'll have bipartisan consensus to want to get him home.
Morgan Ortagus, former State Department spokesperson. Thanks for being back with us here on The Hill. Talk again soon, Morgan. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Blake.
You got it. All right, still much more ahead here on The Hill tonight. Live look in PA as police are about to give an update after they arrested what they're describing as a person of interest in the shooting death of the United Healthcare CEO. That press conference from police expected to happen later this hour, and when that happens, we'll take you there live. All right, welcome back here to The Hill on NewsNation. It is nearly the bottom of the hour, about 6:29 here on the East Coast. And any moment now, we are expecting police in Pennsylvania in the Altoona area to address the media here as it relates to the strong person of interest, as it's being described, in the shooting death of the United Healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson. When that press conference happens, we will take you there live. Meantime, Laura Trump is talking, and polarization is popular. We'll explain here. Our Kelly Meyer is here with that and more, and what's happening in the Capitol. Hello.
Hey there, Blake. It's good to be back. Good to be back with you. And we start the week taking a look at the ever-shifting politics across the Sunshine State. Laura Trump officially announced she is stepping down as the co-chair of the Republican National Committee. This comes as she weighs her political future ahead of her father-in-law, President-elect Donald Trump's return to the White House. And there are reports she could replace Marco Rubio and take over his vacant Florida Senate seat if he is confirmed to be the next Secretary of State. And if confirmed, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis will assign Rubio's replacement to serve for 2 years until the next election in 2026. The FBI and state officials are investigating even more mysterious drone sightings reported in New Jersey and now Philadelphia. 19 elected officials are requesting additional assistance from law enforcement agencies, the FAA and the Department of Homeland Security and the New Jersey State Police, saying those agencies have taken, quote, a reactive instead of a proactive approach to this issue. Those drones were first sighted just before Thanksgiving. Some were even caught flying close to Donald Trump's golf course in Bedminster. And Merriam-Webster is out with their 2024 Word of the Year, and it stems from this year's presidential election. And that word, Blake, is polarization. In an AP interview, Merriam-Webster's editor-at-large said, quote, polarization means division. But it's a very specific kind of division. Polarization means that we are tending toward the extremes rather than toward the center. Merriam-Webster logs nearly 100 million page views a month on its website and chooses the word based on data and search volume. The word polarization was widely used across this year's media landscape. Last year's pick, Blake, was authentic. That's what's happening in the Capitol.
100 million a month?
Yeah.
That's a billion a year, give or take. You were just down under vacationing.
I was.
You were in Australia. Were they talking about the election there? What was your takeaway?
You know, immediately when someone noticed my accent, first they thought I was from Canada, so I had to say I was from the U.S., but then they asked,
you're Kelly from PA. That's who you are.
Exactly. I had to correct him. But he did say, he said, quote, how did you guys elect Trump? And I just said, he has a lot of support in the United States, and it showed in that election.
Were they paying attention?
Yes.
Big time?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Kelly in the Capitol is back. Welcome back, Meyer.
Thank you, Blake.
Appreciate it.
Good to see
you.
you.
Soon later in the show. All right, so who is on first? Republicans aren't exactly at that point of the skit yet, but they are just a month away from actual governing and how to prioritize. Among the questions, the cadence of how Republicans will try to carry out Donald Trump's agenda, immigration, energy, and extending the 2017 Trump tax cuts. But that is not the only item lawmakers need to figure out. Nearly a month ago, President Biden asked Congress for $100 billion in disaster relief funds to help those recovering from Hurricanes Milton and Helene. Now, it has been 73 days since Helene devastated North Carolina. Winter is here for many. Residents still picking up the pieces and will continue for months and years to come. Now, the House has 10 days left in its session. The Senate, 11. Joining me now is the Republican congressman from North Carolina, Greg Murphy, back here on the Hill. Congressman, thanks for being with us. I should note to you off the top here, if that press conference in Pennsylvania happens, we're going to jump to it. But thanks for being with us, of course. So you sent out a letter to your constituents, and I read it. It recently said the priority in Washington is to ensure our neighbors receive the federal assistance that they need. It was 4 weeks ago, November 18th, that the White House said $98 billion is what we need. And here we are, and it hasn't come. Why?
Blake, I think a lot of the things that were sent down by Biden's administration had a lot of things in there that should not be in for disaster relief. And that's given some individuals a fair amount of, and I think deservedly so, heartburn. The North Carolina State General Assembly passed a bill for disaster relief, sent it to Governor Cooper. He vetoed it. They're trying to override the veto. This needs to be not only a federal response, but also a state response. That said, there have been a lot of things with FEMA. They apologized last week because they basically weren't truthful about the number of trailers being sent to Western North Carolina. But this is something that there is extreme urgency to be dealt with. I mean, temperatures are plummeting up there in the mountains, and we need to get this done. We don't need people blocking it. We need to take out some things that don't need to be there, but we need to get this done in D.C.
I hear you about heartburn. I was on the local Asheville paper, the Citizen Times today. Here's the headline, Congressman. It says thousands of private bridges were damaged during Helene. Nonprofits are helping to rebuild. It says that there were 7,000 reports of damage to private roads and bridges in Western North Carolina. 2,700 households have received some funding, $8.2 million. The more applications are pending. There are some Republicans in the House Freedom Caucus who are holding this up. You talk about the heartburn. Andy Harris is the Republican head of the Freedom Caucus. As you know, there was the Key Bridge in Maryland which went down, and he gave an interview, Congressman, in which he said, will it all get done? Talking about Key Bridge funding. Will it all get done? The entire $2 billion? I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure we can make a down payment. And here's why I bring that up, Congressman, because it seems like there's some who are saying, when there's tragedy in my backyard, I'm good with spending. When there's tragedy not in my backyard, heartburn, as you put it. And it sounds hypocritical.
Well, it's nonsense to do this. We are a nation. That's why we have states. That's why we have a federal government to help in times of need in different states, be there wildfires out in the West, tragic, hurricanes that happen on the coast, or ones that, hell, go up the Ohio Valley like this is. This is a time, actually, that we need to come together as government. That said, I don't think wish lists or parks or somewhere else as far as disaster relief needs to occur. But we need to get moving with this. There's enough of the obstructionism. There's enough of the, hey, it's not 100% perfect. I'm not going to vote for that kind of bill. We've seen that way too many times, especially in the last 2 years here. It's time for people to understand that we're here as a federal government to help people in times of need. But what has happened in Western North Carolina is biblical. It's sad. It's been there. I've been out there. We need to help those individuals. We need to help them yesterday, get through the nonsense sent in by the Biden administration. But we also need to get our state and our federal partners working yesterday to make sure that the folks get the relief that they deserve.
Congressman Greg Murphy, Republican from the eastern part of the Tar Heel State. Got to leave it there on a busy news night. Thank you, sir, for being back with us here on the Hill.
Take care, Blake. Thank you.
You got it.
Look at his head of hair. He's got no hair problem, I want to tell you that. Look at that hair, huh?
We're here. We love you all. Thank you.
All right, so that, of course, was Donald Trump introducing the baseball star Juan Soto at the White House in 2019 as a member of the world's champion Washington Nationals. And 5 years later, Soto just hit his net worth out of the park, agreeing to the biggest contract ever in sports history, $765 million over 15 years to play for the New York Mets. Now, to put that salary in perspective here on the Hill, it is roughly equivalent to the salary of one senator for 4,300 years. 88 years for all U.S. senators, 1,300 years for one senator and one president, and the pay of every member of Congress for the past 9 years. All right, unless you get that lucky lotto ticket, that $750 million is probably never coming your way. But here's something that might impact your bank account next year. President-elect Trump over the weekend claiming that he won't try to get rid of Jay Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve.
Will you try to replace Jerome Powell?
No, I don't think so. I don't see it. But I think if I told him to, he would. But if I asked him to, he probably wouldn't. But if I told him to, he would.
You don't have plans to do that right now?
No, I don't.
Powell's term ends in May of 2026, but there have been questions regarding if Trump can and would ever try to get rid of him before then. Now, the Fed helps determine interest rates, and if you have a loan, you can, in part, thank the Fed for playing a role in that rate. Here to break it down with me, Mick Mulvaney, former Trump White House Chief of Staff, NewsNation contributor. You ran the budget for a little while, head of the CFPB. You know the thing about finance, thing or two about finances. How you doing?
Doing good. By the way, I was watching that thing about Juan Soto, and it reminds me of a piece of American history I'm going to butcher from the 1920s when Babe Ruth was making more than the President of the United States, and the press asked him, remember what his answer was?
More important or something?
I had a better year.
There you go. All right. Let me show you why we're talking about Jay Powell and what this all means for your finances. So this is the dot plot, okay? Very wonky, but here's what I want you to pay attention to. 2024, this is the Fed rate right now at about 4.5%. 2025, they are expecting it to tick down about 1% lower to 3.5%. 2026, when the president, in theory, will have a new Fed chair in there, even lower than that. Now, Mick, just hold that thought for a second, because, as you know, rates don't necessarily go hand in hand with everyday items, but this is sort of the impact of how it could impact you, because the average mortgage right now, somewhere in the area of about 6.75%, something like that. An average car loan is in the high 8s right now. So as these numbers tick down, that's sort of what it means for your house, for your house, for your mortgage, etc. Were you shocked by that comment from Trump?
A little bit. I think that the legal team has come to the conclusion, the Trump legal team has come to the conclusion that they have the ability to replace him as the chairman. They don't have the ability to kick him off of the board. And that's an interesting distinction, because he's sort of the chairman of the board.
Right.
And I think if things got really bad, they might try that first. Say, Jay, we need you to step back from chairmanship. You're still going to be on the board. But again, I think a lot of this has to do with the way the economy shakes out in the next couple of months.
Put that dot plot up real quick, because I want to ask Mick for a second, because Donald Trump wants rates low.
Yeah.
He wants them down here, not up here.
Right.
So when he eventually has a Fed pick, what do you think he does? And do you think there's going to be for lack of a better term, a mandate to bring it down here?
It's hard to say there's a mandate, because if you do this too early, if you set rates down here, the reason rates are here is in order to try and dampen inflation.
Right.
Okay? So if we had rates down here when inflation was boiling over, it would have gotten even worse.
Right.
So when you're Donald Trump, you do like low rates because it makes it easy to borrow money and easy to do business. But you don't like high inflation, because that really tends to sort of ruin your brand long term and the legacy that you have as president. So it's a balancing act. And my guess is they're going to have some really interesting conversations in the West Wing over the course of the next 4 years about the interplay between interest rates. And don't forget the value of the dollar, because a dollar is worth more when rates are up here.
Right.
The higher interest rates are in our country, the more the dollar is worth, because more people want to invest in dollars, so the demand for dollars goes up. Trump is going to want interest rates down here because it also lowers the value of the dollar.
Mick Mulvaney, former Trump White House Chief of Staff. Really interesting conversations, he says. Speaking of them, other side of the break, full panel.
I'm here.
You're going to hang around.
Let's do it.
Live look from PA, by the way. Police about to give an update after they arrested a quote-unquote person of interest in the shooting death of the UHC CEO. When that happens, we'll take you there live.
NewsNation tonight. The battle lines are drawn as Pete Hegseth fights to remain President Trump's pick to lead the Pentagon. Will the nomination survive the Senate? Hegseth's attorney joins Dan Abrams live tonight, only on NewsNation.
NewsNation, a live look once again, Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania. Authorities there are expected to give an update on the arrest earlier today related to the shooting of the United Healthcare CEO. When that happens, we will take you there live. Meantime, it's been a busy few weeks for the First Lady, Jill Biden. First, her husband gave their son, Hunter Biden, a blanket pardon that extended for nearly a decade. The president left the country afterwards, and the very next day, it was the First Lady who had to answer questions about the pardon. Then the president had the First Lady attend in Paris for the reopening of the Notre Dame Cathedral as world leaders descended on the City of Lights, including President-elect Trump. On top of all this, Trump posted an image of him and the First Lady at the reopening to promote his fragrance line, captioning the image, "A fragrance your enemies can't resist." Joining me now, a laughing Mick Mulvaney, former chief of staff in the Trump administration, Julia Manchester, national political reporter for TheHill.com, Kelly Meyer, NewsNation Washington correspondent, and Dan Cannonen, Battleground States Director for the Biden-Harris campaign. Hello to you all.
I wasn't the only one laughing at that. Come on.
Look,
I was.
You were. Here's the thing. The president goes to Africa, and Joe Biden has to answer for the pardon. Then she goes to Paris and has to sit 5 feet next to Donald Trump. And I'm thinking, Dan, come on. Well, this keeps getting sent to the spouse and not to him.
They didn't send her out to the podium in the pool, to be clear, right? It was a holiday party event where a question was
She got asked a question.
Yes. And the president is being the president, both in Africa and the U.S., in Washington, where he was managing the U.S.'s response to the Assad regime toppling in Syria, and doing that work of ensuring that we make sure our military is poised to ensure ISIS does not take hold again in Syria. That's serious work. Donald Trump at Notre Dame at a grand opening of a church selling fragrances is not being president. Joe Biden is still being president.
Is he on to something there, or is this a bad look?
I'm going to try and take politics out of it and just say, look at the way the world looks at it, right? I don't dislike Trump. I don't like Trump. I'm just somebody looking at it from the outside. Donald Trump's already the president. It's a unique situation because he's an ex-president coming back. Everybody knows he's coming back. They know who he is. He's one of the most well-known people in the world. I think at least from a foreign policy perspective, he is already the president of the United States. Yes, there's 42 days, and yes, we're hearing stories about the Democrats hurrying to finish projects, get money out the door, and all of that. But de facto, Donald Trump is already the president of the United States.
Like I was saying to you, Blake, I was speaking with reporters in France, and they were asking, where's your president? And I said, which one? Because you had President-elect Trump there. You had the current president that we thought maybe would be going there, but it was the first lady instead. And I think it's just interesting to see, former president and now President-elect Trump on the world stage. And a source said to me today, as we were doing this story on NewsNation, saying that Democrats are pissed, he said, that they are letting Trump essentially become president 2 months early.
Okay, so to be fair, we have seen the White House send for the First Lady in the Biden administration to other foreign events. She was at the coronation of King Charles. We see it with other spouses. So this isn't completely abnormal. I think on top of that, First Lady Jill Biden is very popular. I would say she's probably more popular than Joe Biden. So I think it would make sense sometimes to put her out sort of optically, put a popular figure out maybe instead of the president, who right now, quite frankly, isn't as popular.
But to be clear again, this is a ceremonial role, an event at the Chapel of Notre Dame, at the church. That's what this is. What Joe Biden is doing and what he is conditioned to do both his time in the Senate and as president is deal with foreign events and foreign affairs. And there's a serious thing happening in Syria, and there's a serious issue with Russia and with Ukraine and the implications of those countries and Iran.
Dan,
and he's focused on that. He's not focused on going to a church ceremony.
You're absolutely right. No, you're absolutely right on the church ceremony being ceremonial. I get that. Why not send Harris? Because that's typically what we would have done. You send the vice president to those things, not the first lady without the president.
Would that have made you feel better about his situation?
No, I'm just wondering where Kamala Harris is. Because if things are operating properly in the West Wing, then the vice president's supposed to go to those things. I don't remember ever sending the first lady anywhere to fill in for the president.
Look, I'll just say this really quickly. When we were on the campaign, which I was, there are many, many times that we wanted to deal with campaign business, and whether it was the president or the vice president, if something was serious was happening in the world, our stuff waited until that got dealt with. So whether it's the vice president or the president, they're going to focus on those serious businesses abroad and not the ceremonial pieces when that's required.
I don't know. I see her out there twice next to Trump and then having to sort of answer whether it was fair or not for Hunter. And it's just twice in 1 week. And it's an observation.
I've got a bigger question on the same topic, which is the staff sticking around? That'd be one of my. There's only 42 days left. They want to try and get stuff done, but most of those people in that building are out looking for their next job. Are there enough people there, Dan, to still?
They are. They're committed. Those people are very committed to finishing the job and making sure that as much policy can get done and accomplished in the way for the country as they can.
Give you the last word.
I was going to say they did just put out a memo from the chief of staff, Jeffrey Zients, to all of the staff to say we are not done yet. They're trying to go with the sprint, say there's 42 days left. So they're going to try to keep this going to make sure that they say they get the job done.
I told you we've been monitoring developments in Pennsylvania. The person of interest, quote unquote, who was picked up by authorities today, Luigi Mangione, 26 years old, arraigned on gun charges just a little while ago. Our Alex Capriello is live in Pennsylvania with the very latest there. What happened, Alex?
Yeah, look, they just had that preliminary arraignment where they outlined the charges against him. Mangione, I should say, appearing in person for this hearing. This was the very first time we ever actually laid eyes on him in person. He was barefoot. He was handcuffed at the waist. He had ankle shackles around his legs, long sleeves and pants, and he held his head up high as he walked past us into that courtroom. These are the charges that were outlined against him here in the state of Pennsylvania. Keep in mind, this has to do with his arrest earlier today and not related to the New York City, Manhattan, Midtown murder that happened on Wednesday. Okay, so the counts here in Pennsylvania: first-degree forgery, firearms possession, tampering with weapons, possessions of instruments to commit a crime, and then also possessing a false ID. This was stuff that we heard earlier today from the New York Police Department when they held a press conference saying that the Altoona police had made an arrest of a person of interest that they believe was related to this murder that happened in New York City. Basically, a McDonald's employee spotted him, believed that it was the suspect from New York, and called it into the police, and that's how they were able to make an arrest. So, obviously, following these developments, there's a press conference scheduled to happen any moment here at Blake. Hopefully, we can get that when it comes.
Alex Capriello, live in Pennsylvania. Alex, thank you. Quick break. Press conference, we believe, any moment now. Stay with us. You're watching The Hill.
New York City shooting in recent days. That male was asked for a form of identification. He then provided a fake identification card out of New Jersey. After a brief investigation, it was determined that the ID provided was in fact a fake ID, and he was subsequently arrested for a forgery charge. Once he was taken into custody for that forgery charge, he was transported to the Altoona Police Department. Once at the Altoona Police Department, that male was searched instant to arrest. It was discovered that he had a United States passport that identified him as, Luigi Mangione. From there, continued search of his property. A firearm was located, and a suppressor was also located.